All right, let's dive into a really dramatic and honestly kind of strange story from the biblical book of 2 Kings. It's got everything: a dying prophet, a desperate king, and a single symbolic act that was about to decide the fate of an entire nation. And it really makes you think, what if total victory, I mean, the complete and utter defeat of your biggest enemy, all came down to one simple symbolic act? And what if, when that moment finally came, you just didn't quite follow through? So, to get this story, we've got to set the scene. We're in the northern kingdom of Israel. It's about 798 BC, and things are not good. The whole kingdom is basically on its knees. This timeline kind of shows you where our guy, King Joash, fits into the picture. He gets the crown right around here, and he inherits a total mess. His father's reign was just marked by constant oppression from Syria, so Joash is basically trying to keep the whole thing from falling apart. But this crisis wasn't just military. It was spiritual, and it had been for a long, long time. For more than a century, the kingdom was stuck in what the Bible calls the sins of Jeroboam. This was an official, state-sponsored system of idol worship, with these golden calves as the main event. And here's the kicker. King Joash, he kept it going. He was leading a nation that was in open rebellion against its God. So into this totally desperate situation comes one of the most legendary figures in Israel's history, the prophet Elisha, for one final dramatic act. I mean, think about it. Elisha's been a prophet for over 50 years, but now he's old, he's sick, he's on his deathbed. And in this moment of pure desperation, who shows up? King Joash, the same king who was leading the idol worship. And why? Because deep down, Joash knows this old prophet is Israel's last and only hope. And just listen to what he cries out. These are the exact same words Elisha himself yelled when his mentor, Elijah, was taken up into heaven in that fiery chariot. Joash is making a huge statement here. He's basically admitting our real defense, our true army, it was never our soldiers. It was the power of God working through you. And this contrast between the two prophets is really telling. Elijah had this spectacular, fiery exit. Elisha, he just dies a quiet, normal death from an illness. And that signals a major shift. The power isn't just in the man himself anymore. It's in the enduring power of the prophetic word that he's leaving behind. So from his deathbed, Elisha sets up one last prophetic act. And this isn't just some strange, random ritual. It's a test of the king's faith and his obedience. Okay, let's break this down. Elisha tells Joash to grab a bow and arrows. Then he puts his own frail, dying hands over the king's strong ones. This is symbolic, right? It's saying this victory is not going to come from human strength, but from God's power. Joash shoots an arrow eastward, right towards Syria, and Elisha declares that is the arrow of the Lord's deliverance. And then comes the final crucial instruction. Now take the rest of the arrows and strike the ground. So how many times does he do it? 3. He strikes the ground once, twice, 3 times, and then he stops. And the dying prophet becomes absolutely furious. Why? Because in that one moment of hesitation, the king showed the limits of his faith. Elisha tells him, you should have struck the ground 5 or 6 times. That would have meant total victory. By stopping at 3, he literally put a limit on his own rescue. Yeah, this chart lays it out perfectly. The potential was right there for total victory, for completely wiping out the Syrian threat for good. But what they got, because of partial obedience and half-hearted faith, was only a partial victory. That hesitation by the king had real strategic consequences for the whole nation. But believe it or not, the story doesn't end there. Elisha dies, but his power and the power of the words he spoke was far from finished.
And so Elisha died. The great prophet, the miracle worker, is buried. And that powerful voice goes silent. It really seems like the end of an era.
But the story isn't over, not by a long shot. What happens next is one of the most jaw-dropping moments in the entire Old Testament. So get this. Sometime later, another man dies, and they're burying him in the same area. As they're lowering his body into a tomb, it accidentally touches the bones of Elisha, and the dead man comes back to life. Now, this isn't about magic bones or anything like that. This is God making a statement, shouting to all of Israel that the power behind Elisha's words was absolutely real, and it didn't die while the prophet did. So what's the point of this absolutely wild miracle? Well, it's doing a few things at once. It's stamping Elisha's authority with a divine seal of approval. It proves that God's power isn't tied to a living person. And it shows that even though Israel kept messing up, God was still merciful. It was just a stunning sign of hope. So what happened with that arrow prophecy? Well, check this out. It was fulfilled exactly. Just like the prophet said, King Joash goes on to fight the Syrians and defeats them precisely 3 times. Not 2, not 4, 3 times. He gets back the cities Israel had lost, but he doesn't destroy the Syrian threat. His partial obedience led to a partial deliverance. And this really brings us to the core takeaway of this whole story. God's word gets fulfilled with almost mathematical precision, even when our own faith, our own follow-through, is hesitant and incomplete. The promise of total victory was real, but the result was limited by human action. Which kind of leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? How often does our own half-hearted commitment, our own hesitation to just go all in, end up limiting a much greater outcome that was possible in our own lives? It's a powerful question, all coming from this ancient story of a dying prophet and his last arrow.